Greetings, abstraction students. Happy Friday. I hope this finds you well and having enjoyed a productive and enriching week. I thought I would spend some time talking about the impact of Cezanne's work on the development of abstraction, particularly as it's manifest in the work of Picasso and Matisse. And it also gives me the opportunity to talk about an important historical phenomenon, and that is the agency of other actors than artists. The need in the art world, in the development of artistic practice, for critics and curators, but also for collectors, and particularly at the turn of the 20th century, supporters who were able to sponsor exhibitions, collectors who were able to support the work of artists, especially artists who were not receiving significant critical attention and institutional and were not beneficiaries of institutional patronage and validation. And we underestimate just how important the risks on the part of collectors and dealers were in supporting and championing particular artists when the value of their work was anything but settled. Moreover, the importance of particular works of art, the importance of artists actually seeing specific artworks plays a very important role in the development of art history, and we often lose sight of that. And so I want to focus a little bit of attention on this relationship between the impact that Cezanne had upon Matisse and Picasso and the role that Gertrude Stein played in brokering that relationship in large part. So in the email that this video in which this video is attached, I've also attached some photographs of Leo and Gertrude Stein. Leo and Gertrude were brothers. They had significant financial means, but they weren't part of the uber wealthy. They could afford art collections, but they couldn't afford European masters, and they couldn't afford the Impressionists. What they could afford were the younger artists' work. And one of the first artists that they began to collect when they came to Paris, they're Americans. They have roots in Baltimore. And another part of the family have roots in San Francisco. And so that's why there are significant collections of Cezanne and early 20th century modernism in the collections of the Baltimore Museum of Art and also the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art as well. But Leo and Gertrude had an apartment in Paris, and a painting by Paul Cézanne was one of the first that they purchased. And Cézanne had been a kind of an underground figure. He had developed a kind of mythic status amongst the artists. And it was the artists that gravitated towards Cézanne first. And the dealer Ambroise Voillard noticed that Cézanne had become an artist, and so he began trying to buy up some of Cézanne's work. And when Cézanne died, he bought up the entire studio. And so he really became the central person, the gatekeeper through which a person would see Cézanne's work. And the Steins developed an art collection that quickly became the envy of the avant-garde in Paris, and also came to the notification of artists in America. And artists from New York would traveled to Paris, hoping to be able to go to the Steins' Sunday salon. So they would open up their apartment on Sunday afternoon. It really became a context in which avant-garde art would be on view for artists and critics. And so it became, in many ways, the public exhibition space, the semi-public exhibition space. And I've included a photograph of the Steins' apartment, and I want you to notice a particular painting by Paul Cézanne. It was a portrait of his wife. He painted over 20 portraits of his wife throughout his lifetime, and this portrait with a fan, as it's called, is one of Gertrude and Leo's prized possessions. It was a painting that both Matisse and Cézanne were deeply influenced by. And what Picasso saw in that painting was the potential to be able to offer, or a potential to be able to rise to the challenge that Cézanne had presented. And so Picasso's strategy was to propose to Gertrude that he would paint her portrait. And what he wanted to do was to paint a painting that would rival Cézanne's portrait of his wife. Supposedly, Cézanne had made his wife sit for hundreds of sittings, or 80 sittings, or something of that nature, as he struggled to paint her portrait. And so what Picasso did with Gertrude, he convinced her, and she came to his studio and he painted a portrait. It was an opportunity for him to get to know her. They developed a close relationship. And in fact, Gertrude was, in many ways, Picasso was Gertrude's discovery and patron, while her brother Leo was first attracted and remained attracted to Matisse's work. But Picasso's rivalry with Cézanne was worked out through this portrait. He selected a canvas size that was exactly the same size as Cézanne's portrait of his wife. And he made Gertrude sit for numerous occasions. He had a lot of trouble painting this portrait, and trying to figure out how to finish the portrait was a constant trouble for him into the summer of 1905. And he abandoned it. He went back to Spain, to Iberia, and he studied ancient Iberian folk painting and sculptural artifacts, looked at African masks, and happened upon an idea, a pathway to be able to finish the portrait. And that portrait, the face of Gertrude, as you see in the JPEG attachment, is a face that is deeply influenced by African, non-Western tribal imagery and the African mask. Picasso was a frequent visitor to the Paris anthropology museums to see the African masks. There were important exhibitions at the time that Picasso saw. Picasso was actually even accused of stealing some of the artifacts. And Picasso finished the painting without Gertrude actually sitting for the final portion. And it is that face that provides the means by which Picasso then begins to paint his revolutionary painting of 1907, which art historians claim begins the 20th century, called Demoiselles d'Avignon. Now, it's interesting. Picasso's portrait of Gertrude Stein hangs at the Metropolitan, and Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon hangs in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And Picasso succeeded in painting a portrait that was of interest to Gertrude, Supposedly, Gertrude said to him when she saw it that this doesn't look anything like me. And Picasso's response supposedly was, "Don't worry, it will." And I also have included a photograph of Gertrude sitting in a chair underneath Picasso's portrait. So Picasso succeeded in accomplishing what he wanted to do. He wanted to create a pendant. He wanted to achieve what Cézanne had achieved art historically, to match the level of an artist that he admired, that he considered a hero, and also to do it, to play it out on the occasion of developing a collector as a patron and as a friend. And so his work would be on view next to Picasso, next to Cézanne. So when young artists from America, when curators would come to see the exhibitions, they would see the young Picasso's painting next to Cézanne's. Matisse was also deeply influenced by Cézanne, and Matisse tells a very touching story. I've included a photograph of this painting. It's a small painting, painted in the 1890s by Cézanne, that consists of 3 nudes. And it's a painting that Matisse wanted very much. He had seen it at Ambrose Voillard's gallery, but he couldn't afford it. And his wife knew how much it meant to him. And so his wife agreed to give him an heirloom that he pawned. And he then purchased the painting. And the painting stayed with Matisse's family, and it became, his biographer, one of Matisse's biographers said, it became an icon for the family. It was a means by which they affirmed the importance of art for their father and husband, and the patriarch of the family, and it was a means by which Matisse himself, as he claimed in a letter that he wrote to a curator in Paris when he donated the painting in the 1930s to one of the city museums. He said, "I want you to realize how important this was to me as I was developing. When I doubted my work, I looked at Cézanne's painting and it gave me guidance. And it is what gave me my faith and perseverance." And so this painting has had a religious impact on Matisse's life. At the outbreak of the First World War, Matisse was facing serious financial problems. It's something to keep in mind. With the development of with the explosion of the First World War, many of the dealers in Paris were Germans, and many of the important collectors were from Germany. And with the development of the First World War, the Germans were expunged from Paris, and the international scope of the art world shut down. And many artists, Picasso among them, who were identified with artistic practices that were supported by the Germans, were marginalized. And so with the art world drying up, Matisse's capacity to be able to make a living was under tremendous threat, and Matisse considered selling the Cézanne painting, and he put it to a vote to his wife and their 2 children. And they all reacted vehemently against it. And they demanded that Matisse not sell it. It meant that much to them as a family. Also, Matisse was I think about 10 years older than Picasso, was more established. And Picasso saw Matisse as a formidable adversary, and as someone who, like Picasso, had aspirations for greatness, and he sensed that greatness. And in terms of Picasso's own rather strange personality, that recognition of greatness and respect was worked out in rather strange behavioral ways, kind of an ambivalence and a kind of reticence in terms of interacting with each other. But not only did Cezanne challenge Picasso as a painter, but Matisse did too. And given the fact that the Steins' home was also a home where Matisse's work was shown, Picasso was able to see that work in full measure. And Picasso saw a painting that Matisse had painted called The Blue Nude that knocked him over and truly put the challenge on his court. Now, and I have the photograph, I have a JPEG of that painting for you in this email. Blue Nude, Matisse painted this painting on the occasion of a very significant event at the Louvre, and that is Monet's controversial painting Olympia, which was painted in 1863, I believe, and created such an uproar. Had been accepted by the Salon, by the Academy, and exhibited in the Salon of that year only for it to be mocked. Had been acquired by the Impressionist painter and collector, very wealthy collector, Gustave Caillebotte. And Caillebotte amassed a very significant collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings, and he gifted them to the Musée du Luxembourg in Paris, the Museum of Modern Art. And it was reluctantly accepted, and that painting of Monet's had been shown at that museum. But in 1907, in 1907, I believe, it had been transferred to the Louvre and presented on view next to the neoclassical painter Ingres' famous reclining nude, the Odalisque. And that impact of both Ingres' Odalisque and Monet's Olympia was the occasion for Matisse to rise to the level of both Monet and Ingres and paint a painting that was worthy of taking its place and is powerful. And Picasso sees the Blue Nude, no doubt having gone to the Louvre and knowing Ingres' work and knowing Monet's work and knowing the public attention that event and what that meant for the avant-garde, to have Monet, the one rejected by the institutions, rejected by the Academy, now being celebrated in the Louvre, was an occasion for Picasso. And the fact that the Blue Nude itself had also entered the Stein collection. Picasso, with that push, began painting what would be the Demoiselles d'Avignon, a painting that he did not show in public, and that was not shown in public until (1914) in a public auction. And the auction of Daniel Henry Kahnweiler, the German collector and dealer, his work being dispersed. So I hope these thoughts are helpful to you. I wanted to give you a sense that the track of the history of modern art is and the history of the art of the visual arts in general is a history of artists looking at particular works, interpreting those particular works in their own particular ways. Monet's reclining nude, his Olympia, is an interpretation of Titian and the Venus of Urbino and Giorgione's Pastoral Symphony. And artists are participating in the practice of painting, recognizing that there are painters that have gone before, and not just great painters, but great works of art. And a tradition at the Louvre was for young artists to petition to the museum to have permission to be able to copy certain paintings. And many artists that in the history of modern art, Courbet, Monet, and others, make sustained studies of these works. And that these works are means by which they create their own history. And in particularly within the context of modern art, as it's developing and reconstituting its own history, what tradition is, what is the modern artistic tradition? It is the artist, in many ways, defining that tradition, reinterpreting that tradition, building their own pantheon of artists and works of art that are challenging to them, comforting to them, that spur them on. And that's why exhibitions are so important for other artists, going to those exhibitions, seeing that work on display, being influenced by other artists. And why in terms of doing a history of art and studying the history of art, we have to study the history of particular artists' engagement with particular works of art and how they interpreted them within the context of their own work. So I hope these thoughts are helpful to you. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to addressing you with our new topic, which will focus on Russian constructivism. Take care.